The guest house light was on when I pulled into the driveway, and I remember thinking, with the specific stupidity of someone who still trusts the universe to be roughly fair, someone just forgot to turn it off. That was a Tuesday evening in November. The Chesapeake was doing what it does in November, which is remind you that it is ancient and enormous and has never once cared about your problems. I'd driven back from Baltimore in traffic that had taken 40 minutes to travel 7 miles. My coat was still damp from rain that had stopped 3 hours ago, and I had a half-drunk cup of gas station coffee sitting in the cup holder like a cautionary tale. The house, our actual house, the one Daniel and I had bought 4 years earlier, and spent the following 3 renovating until it nearly dissolved our marriage before anything else got the chance, was dark. Daniel was supposed to be at a conference in Philadelphia. I wasn't expecting anyone, which is why I sat in the car for a full minute and a half, looking at that guest house light. The guest house was not, technically, a guest house. It was a converted boathouse, sitting 20 meters down the lawn from the main property, right at the water's edge. The previous owners had put in heated floors and a clawfoot tub and a kitchen the size of a generous closet, and when we bought the place, I'd said it would be perfect for when my mother visited. This is foreshadowing. I mention it now because you deserve to know that I installed the heated floors. I picked out the tiles. I gave my mother a key so she could let herself in when she came to stay, and I did all of this with the deep, misplaced confidence of a woman who believed her mother was, at baseline, on her side. The light was warm, amber, the kind of light a lamp makes when it's been on for a while. I got out of the car. I want to be precise about what I knew at this moment, because precision matters when you're trying to explain to someone, or to yourself, or to the ceiling at 2 a.m, exactly where your life divided into before and after. What I knew. The guest house had been empty for 6 weeks, since my mother's last visit. What I knew. I was the only person with a key besides Daniel, and Daniel was in Philadelphia. What I did not know. That my mother had made a copy of that key. That she had given it to a woman named Renata Sabo. That Renata Sabo was 26 weeks pregnant with my husband's child. That my mother knew all of this and had said nothing to me. That instead of saying something to me, she had, apparently, helped. I walked down the lawn in the dark. The grass was wet. My shoes were not waterproof. I knocked on the door of my own guest house. The woman who answered it was approximately my age, maybe 3 years younger, with dark hair pulled back and the particular posture of someone who has been very tired for a long time and has made a kind of peace with it. She was wearing a cardigan I recognized, not because I'd seen it on her, because I'd seen it in a catalog. My mother had shown me that catalog. She'd circled things in it with a ballpoint pen, the way she used to circle things in the Sears catalog when I was 7, and she'd said, "Don't you think this would be nice for the guest house, for when I visit?" And I'd said, "Sure, Mom, whatever you want." And apparently my mother had taken that permission and driven it somewhere I hadn't anticipated. The woman looked at me. I looked at the cardigan. "You must be Margot," she said. She said it carefully. Not like someone who is surprised, but like someone who has been rehearsing for this conversation and is now deciding whether to use the rehearsed version or improvise. I watched her make that decision in real time. She went with improvised. "I think," she said, "we need to talk. I think," I said inside my own head, "that you are in my house." But what I actually said was nothing, because my brain had done what brains do when they encounter something they genuinely weren't prepared for. It just sat there for a second with its mouth open. "Your mother said you'd understand," Renata said. "Eventually. And that is the sentence I keep returning to. Not the discovery of the affair, which came later, piecemeal, in the way all confirmed suspicions arrive. with a horrible mixture of vindication and devastation. Not the documents, which I'll get to. Not even the conversation with my mother, which was the single most clarifying and most damaging exchange of my adult life. The sentence I come back to, in the dark, is your mother said you'd understand eventually. Because the word eventually does a lot of work in that sentence. It means she knew you wouldn't understand right away. It means she thought about this. It means she decided to do it anyway. That is where this story begins, or rather, that is the first threshold. The story itself had been happening for considerably longer. My name is Margot Ellison, and I have a fallibility I should name up front because honesty demands it, and also because pretending otherwise would insult your intelligence. I am very good at not knowing things I don't want to know. This is distinct from denial, which is active. What I do is more passive, a kind of selective blindness, a talent for looking at things at slightly the wrong angle so the uncomfortable parts fall outside my field of vision. I have had this talent my whole life. My therapist calls it a protective mechanism. I call it the thing that allowed me to stay married for 6 years to a man who had been lying to me for at least one of them. Daniel Ellison was not, when I married him, a person I expected to be writing about like this. He was charming, which is usually a warning sign, but which I had chosen to interpret as a character virtue. He was also ambitious, a good cook, and capable of a particular kind of focused attention, the kind where it genuinely felt, when he looked at you, like you were the only thing in the room. I know now that he gave this attention to multiple people. At the time, it felt like being chosen. We met in 2016 at a mutual friend's party in Georgetown. We dated for 2 years. We were engaged for 1. We bought the Annapolis property the year we married, because Daniel had grown up going to the Naval Academy town on weekends and had this deep, almost territorial feeling about the Chesapeake. He wanted a waterfront property the way some people want children, with a conviction so fundamental it predated reason. I found that romantic. The house was $1.4 million, half of which was his and half of which was mine. And I want you to hold that detail because it becomes relevant in Act 4. The house had the converted boathouse. It had a wraparound porch that faced the water, and a kitchen with soapstone counters that I still miss with a physical ache that surprises me. It had a garden that we never properly kept up, a dock that needed repairing every spring, and 3 bedrooms upstairs, one of which we had been, for the entirety of our marriage, trying to fill. This is the part I don't particularly enjoy narrating, but here we are. I cannot have children. This is not a mystery I'm slowly building toward. It's just a fact, the kind that announces itself with clinical bluntness, and then lives with you forever at varying volumes. I was diagnosed with premature ovarian insufficiency at 31. My hormone levels did a thing they weren't supposed to do. My ovarian reserve, a term I had never encountered before 31, and which I now know more about than I know about most things, was, as my doctor put it with the specific compassion of someone who has delivered this sentence many times, significantly diminished. We tried. I don't need to explain what trying looks like because most people know, or can guess, or have their own version of it. But I will say, it is expensive and hopeful, and then devastating, and then hopeful again, a cycle that is somehow worse than simply being told no immediately. My mother was present for most of this. She came to appointments. She held my hand in waiting rooms that smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. She said the right things. She said, "This doesn't define you." She said, "There are other options." She said, "You are enough, just as you are." She said all of this while, apparently, maintaining a parallel opinion she had not yet disclosed to me, which was, but a biological grandchild would be better. I am not being uncharitable. I am being accurate. I am getting there. The key. Let me talk about the key. My mother's name is Diane. Diane Park, née Kim. She married my father when she was 23, in the immigrant daughter way of marrying someone your parents approve of and then spending 30 years building a life around the approval and the person, and sometimes forgetting to distinguish between the two. My father died when I was 19. My mother has been, since then, the kind of woman who channels everything into her primary remaining relationship, which is with me, her only child. I understood this to be love. I still understand it to be love. This is the complicated part that I don't want you to miss. It was love. It was just love that had, at some point, made a calculation that I didn't survive. I gave her the key to the guest house in 2021, when we finished the renovation. She visited 4 times a year, sometimes more. She had a specific mug she used, a specific drawer she kept her reading glasses in, a specific spot on the Adirondack chairs at the water's edge where she sat in the mornings with her tea. She was comfortable there. She had made it comfortable. I thought this was wonderful. I did not think about what it meant that she had a key I'd never asked for back. Now, the parallel timeline. Because while I was navigating infertility and renovation and marriage, and what I now understand was a slow, quiet, marital deterioration, Daniel was having an affair. He had been having it, as best as I can reconstruct, since approximately April of the previous year. Renata Sabo was a project manager at his firm. They had met on a job. She was younger than me, which is such a cliché that I find it almost restful. At least it's predictable. She was Hungarian-American, originally from Pittsburgh, living in Annapolis on a lease that was up in September. She had been, as I would later learn from the documents, described in a text chain with my mother as lovely and very healthy. Very healthy. My mother texted someone to call his mistress very healthy. I need you to sit with that for a moment. Take your time. I certainly had to. Here is what I did not do on that November evening, standing in the doorway of my own guest house, looking at a pregnant stranger wearing a catalog cardigan. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not, as some part of me retrospectively wishes I had, simply close the door and call the police. What I did was step inside, because I had been raised by Diane Park to be polite, and old habits, particularly the ones instilled in childhood by someone who loves you enough to eventually use that love as a weapon, are remarkably durable. The inside of the guest house smelled like someone had been living there for several weeks. Bergamot, and something baking, and the particular smell of inhabited space. There were books on the shelf I didn't recognize, a pair of shoes by the door, not mine, a prenatal vitamin bottle on the kitchen counter, sitting there with the calm of an object that belongs somewhere, and on the small dining table, a manila envelope. Renata followed my gaze to the envelope. "Your mother left that," she said. "She said you'd probably want to see it, when the time came." I picked it up. I didn't open it right away. I set it back down and looked at Renata. Really looked at her. The way you look at someone when you are trying to understand what their existence means for your own. And I said, with a steadiness that surprised me, "How long have you been staying here?" 3 weeks, she said. "And before that?" She hesitated. "Before that, I was in an apartment, in Eastport. And Daniel knew you were here." It was not a question, but she answered it anyway. And the way she answered it, with a very small, very specific nod that contained multitudes, told me that Daniel had not just known, but had been here. Had been here while I believed he was at conferences, at work dinners, at the kinds of abstract professional obligations that sound like excuses only in retrospect. "And my mother," I said. How long has my mother known about? And here I gestured at the room, at Renata, at the prenatal vitamins, at everything. All of this? Renata looked at her hands. Since June, she said. It was November. 5 months. My mother had known about my husband's affair and his pregnant girlfriend for 5 months, and she had not told me. She had instead, apparently, developed a relationship with this woman, given her access to my property, and left a manila envelope on the table like some kind of procedural handoff, like I was being onboarded to a situation she had already decided the outcome of. I picked up the envelope. I walked out of the guest house. I walked up the lawn in the dark, my shoes still wet, the Chesapeake still not caring, and I sat down on the porch of my own house and opened the envelope. That was turning point 1. Let me describe what was in the envelope, because this is the part that moves the story from domestic drama into something that requires a different vocabulary. A vocabulary that is, and I choose this word deliberately, architectural. Because what my mother had done was not impulsive. What my mother had done was planned. The envelope contained 4 documents. The first was a printed copy of a text exchange between my mother and Daniel, dated June 14th, a Wednesday. I looked it up, just to complete the picture. In it, Daniel tells my mother that Renata is pregnant. My mother responds, "How far along?" Daniel says, 11 weeks. My mother says, "Does Margot know?" Daniel says, "No." Then, and this is the part where I had to stop reading for a moment, just to recalibrate my understanding of the last decade of my life, my mother says, "Let me think about how to handle this." Not, "How could you do this to my daughter?" Not, "I'm telling her myself if you won't." Not any of the things a mother says when her first allegiance is to her child. Instead, "Let me think about how to handle this." The grammar of management. The syntax of someone who has already, somewhere in their mind, decided that the situation has a solution, and the solution is not the one that ends in my knowing the truth. The second document was a lease agreement. Now here is where I need to slow down and be very precise, because precision is the only thing that makes this bearable to recount. The lease agreement was for the guest house, my guest house. It was dated September 1st. The property address was correct. Our address, our house, the one Daniel and I owned jointly. The lessee was listed as Renata Sabo. The monthly rent was $0, described in the document as a family arrangement. The agreement was for a period of 6 months, running through February 28th. It was signed by 2 parties, Daniel Ellison and Diane Park. Not Margot Ellison. Not the woman whose name was on the property deed. Not the person who had renovated the guest house, installed the heated floors, given her mother a key out of trust and love, and the simple, catastrophic assumption that the key would be used for its intended purpose. My mother had co-signed a lease to give my husband's pregnant mistress access to my home. She'd dated it, initialed the corners, and appended a handwritten addendum, the third document, specifying that the arrangement was to be kept private within the family structure until an appropriate time. She had written those words. I recognized her handwriting. I have spent my entire life recognizing my mother's handwriting. The fourth document was a printout from a county property records website. It showed the guest house, the boathouse, technically, prior to conversion, assessed separately from the main dwelling. There was a note in my mother's handwriting in the margin. Separate legal structure. Important for later. Important for later. I want to leave that phrase here, like a pin in a map, because it points somewhere I'm not ready to take you yet. Hold it. We'll get there. I sat with these documents on my porch for what I think was about 20 minutes. The Chesapeake was making its November sounds. The water against the dock pilings, the particular slap and retreat of small waves, the scrape of a loose plank on the dock. A great blue heron flew over in the dark, which I only knew because of the sound. There's one that nests somewhere near the property, and I had always felt a foolish affection for it, and I want to include it here because it was the most normal thing happening that evening and I needed something normal to hold on to. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Margot," she said. Her voice was not frightened. Not guilty, exactly. It was the voice of someone who has been waiting for a phone call and is now trying to manage it in real time. I know my mother's register very well. This was her. "I am about to explain something that you are not going to receive well register." "I'm sitting on my porch," I said. "I have the envelope." "I know," she said. "Then you should probably start talking." There was a pause. Not the pause of someone collecting their courage, but the pause of someone deciding which version of the truth to begin with. I've since thought about that pause many times. It was about 4 seconds long. "She needed somewhere stable," my mother said. "The apartment lease was up, and she couldn't, with the baby coming. Mom. The circumstances aren't—" "Margot, listen to me." "I am listening," I said. "I've been listening to you my entire life. What I'm asking is for you to explain to me how you ended up on a lease agreement for my property to house my husband's mistress." A pause. Then quietly, "She's pregnant." "I know she's pregnant," I said. "I just met her. She's in my guest house." "The baby is—" She stopped. When she started again, her voice had changed. It had gone into a register I knew less well, one that was lower and more careful. "The baby is going to be my grandchild," she said. "And you—" She stopped again. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "And you can't give me one." She didn't say it. She had the decency, or the cowardice, not to say it. But it was there, in the gap she left, as clearly as if she'd written it. I hung up. Here is what I assumed, at this point in the story. Daniel had the affair. Renata got pregnant. My mother found out and, in a moment of weak, desperate selfishness, accommodated the situation rather than confront it. I assumed my mother was reactive. I assumed she was responding to circumstances she'd been handed, not circumstances she had in any way shaped. I was wrong about this. Not completely, but substantially enough that learning the full truth was its own separate devastation, distinct from everything that came before it. Let me take you to the morning after. I called my friend Petra first. Petra is an immigration attorney who grew up in Prague and has a quality I deeply admire, which is that she is constitutionally incapable of being surprised by human behavior. "Get a property attorney," she said, without preamble. "Today." "Don't you want to ask questions first?" "I have questions," Petra said, "but the questions can wait until after you've protected the property." This is what good friends do. They skip the consolation and go straight to the practical, and then they let you cry about it later when you're in a better position to cry. I retained a property attorney that afternoon, a woman named Sarah Brandt in Annapolis, who had the energy of someone who has seen everything and judges nothing, which is exactly the energy you need in a legal professional when your life is doing what mine was doing. But before I met with Sarah, I drove to my mother's house. She lives 20 minutes from the Annapolis property in a condo development near the water in Arnold, Maryland, which, if you know, the area is exactly the kind of mid-tier waterfront-adjacent community that exists to be near the nicer waterfront communities without quite being in them. I had been to that condo approximately 100 times. I knew which drawer she kept her second set of reading glasses in. I pulled into her parking spot and sat in the car for a moment, looking at her windows. Her lights were on. Her curtains were open. I could see the blue flicker of her television. My mother was watching TV. While I was processing the most significant betrayal of my adult life, my mother was watching TV. I found this so deeply ordinary that I had to laugh. A short, strange sound I was grateful no one was around to hear. I went in. She was expecting me. She'd made tea for both of us, mine with the right amount of milk because she's known how I take tea for 39 years, and she was sitting at her kitchen table with her hands folded and the expression of a woman who has prepared for a difficult conversation and is trying to lead with composure. The kitchen smelled like barley tea and something faintly floral, the lotion she's used my entire life. And that smell, that particular ordinary smell, did something to my chest that I had not expected. "Sit down," she said. I sat. I looked at the tea. I did not touch it. "Tell me everything," I said. "Not the version where you managed the information. The actual version." She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she met my eyes. "Daniel told me about Renata in June," she said. "He called me. He said he didn't know what to do. He said he was scared." "He called you," I said. "Not me. His wife." "He said he was scared of how you'd react." I filed this away. "Go on." "We talked several times over a few weeks. He told me about the baby. He told me that Renata was healthy, that she was young, that the pregnancy was progressing normally." She paused. She looked at the wall to my left, the one with the framed photograph of me at my college graduation. And then she looked back at her hands. "He told me she didn't have family here, that she was going to be alone in all of it." The way she said healthy, the way she said young, these were not descriptors. These were specifications. She was describing Renata the way you describe a candidate for something. "You wanted her to have the baby," I said. "I wanted—" My mother's voice did something complicated. "I have wanted to be a grandmother since before you were married. You know that." "I know." "And when it became clear that you wouldn't, that you couldn't—" "Say it," I said. She met my eyes. "I wanted a grandchild, Margot." The room was quiet. The television was still going in the next room. Some cooking show, someone demonstrating a technique, the bright patter of daytime instruction. And I thought, that sound. That is the sound of the normal world continuing to happen while something is being very precisely taken apart. "So you didn't tell me," I said, "about the affair, about the pregnancy. You didn't tell me because, what? You thought if I knew, I'd end the marriage and you'd lose access to the grandchild." She said nothing. "Mom, I thought," she said carefully, "that if Renata had somewhere stable, if things could be managed, I said, then perhaps there was a way for the family to—" "What family?" My voice was very quiet. I had not expected it to be quiet. I had expected to be louder, more dramatic, more of what the situation seemed to call for. But what came out was quiet, because the thing I was feeling was not hot. It was cold. "What family were you imagining exactly? One where my husband and his pregnant girlfriend live in my guest house while I— what? Make peace with it? Find a role? Be the aunt?" My mother had the grace to look stricken. I didn't think it through that far," she said. "You thought it through far enough to co-sign a lease," I said. She looked up. "You signed that document," I said. "You put your name on a lease for a property that is half mine. You did that without telling me, without asking me, without consulting me in any way. And the only way you could have accessed that property was with a key that I gave you because I trusted you." I paused. "With my key, Mom. You used my key." Those words sat in the air between us like an object. My mother opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked, for the first time in this conversation, like someone who has understood the full shape of what they've done. Not the individual decisions, but the aggregate, the architecture, the whole thing as it appears from the outside when all the pieces are assembled. She looked like someone who had been constructing a building from the inside without ever standing back far enough to see what it looked like from the street. "I thought," she said, very quietly, "that I was solving a problem." "You were," I said. I stood up. "Just not mine." Here is what I learned from the full investigation that followed, pieced together from Daniel's texts, my mother's phone records, which she eventually showed me herself, voluntarily, in a gesture I still don't fully know how to interpret, and the documents Sarah ordered. My mother had not merely found out about the affair and accommodated it. From the moment Daniel called her in June, she had been making decisions. She had driven to Annapolis and met Renata, alone, without telling me, 3 times before the guest house arrangement began. She had sat with this woman in a cafe in Eastport. I know which cafe because my mother is a creature of habit, and there is only one cafe in Eastport she would have chosen, and when I walked by it later and saw the booth by the window, I had a moment of vertigo I don't recommend. And she had asked Renata about her health, her background, her plans for the baby. She had brought a small gift on the second visit, hand cream, something from the brand my mother always gave. By Renata's own account, my mother had been warm, had been kind. My mother had been auditioning Renata for a role. The role was mother of my grandchild. The role was, implicitly, replacement daughter. I don't mean this in the dramatic sense of she loved Renata more than me. I mean it in the architectural sense. My mother had, somewhere in the grief of my infertility, built a mental structure around the idea of a grandchild. And when her biological daughter proved unable to provide one, she had identified another candidate and begun the slow, careful process of incorporating her into the structure. The structure did not require my consent because the structure did not, it turned out, have a place for me in the load-bearing parts. My mother didn't betray me for my husband. She replaced me for a uterus. I am not going to apologize for the directness of that sentence. I spent a long time finding the precise words for what happened, and those are them. Daniel came home from Philadelphia on Thursday. He was actually in Philadelphia. This is the specific cruelty of a person who is cheating. They tell some truths in among the lies, so you can never fully trust the truth. He had texted me from the conference. He'd sent a photo of a dinner with colleagues. He was in Philadelphia. He just also had a pregnant girlfriend in my guest house, which he had arranged with my mother, and which he walked into on Thursday evening completely unaware that I had spent the previous 48 hours with an attorney, talking to Renata, and assembling the full picture with the methodical focus of someone who has found, in the middle of her own devastation, a project. He came through the front door, put his bag down. "Margot?" I was in the kitchen. I was making dinner, a habit, an automatic behavior, the kind that continues running in the background while the foreground is doing something else entirely. I was making pasta. The soapstone counters were floured. The kitchen smelled like garlic and butter, which is one of the most comforting smells in the human olfactory range, and which therefore felt, in this moment, like it was mocking me. "In here," I said. He came in, kissed me on the cheek, and I thought, you have done this every time you've come home for 6 years, and approximately how many of those times were you also in the middle of something I didn't know about? He smelled like travel, that airport and hotel smell, and he looked tired, and he looked like my husband, which is the problem with being married to someone. They continue to look like themselves even after they've stopped being who you thought they were. "How was the drive?" he said. "Fine," I said. He poured himself a glass of water, I stirred the pasta. "Did anything happen while I was gone?" he said. And this is the specific gift that 48 hours of preparation gives you in a moment like this. The gift of choosing your timing. I had considered multiple approaches with the precision of a chess player who doesn't particularly like chess, but has decided to play it well anyway. I had considered surprise, confrontation at the door, evidence laid out on the table, but what I had settled on was this. "You should go check on the guest house," I said. He went still. It was the kind of still that says everything, not the still of someone confused, wondering what could possibly be in the guest house. The still of someone who has just felt the floor become uncertain beneath them. "Margot, go check on the guest house," I said again. "I'll be here." He left. I stood at the stove. The pasta cooked. I did not, for approximately 8 minutes, move. Then I turned off the stove, set down the spoon, and went and sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine. He came back in 12 minutes. He sat down across from me.